Welcome to Night Talks, the University of Florida College of Journalism and Communications talk show produced by students for you. I'm Mia Carrasco, a first-year student studying media production technology and management. And today our guest is Liz Levine, a CJC alum who is a 2025 40 Gators Under 40 honoree and was named a UF Alumni Leader of the Year in 2023. She is currently Senior Manager of Affiliate Relations at the CBS Television Network. Hi Liz, thank you so much for being here today.
Hi Mia, thank you for having me.
Of course. So I heard that you originally hail from New Jersey. What inspired you to earn dual degrees from UF?
Growing up in New Jersey, we didn't have a ton of college sports in the atmosphere. We had Rutgers and they were always good at women's basketball, and that was about it. So if you go look at Rutgers football stadium today, you'll see it's a real built out stadium. Back when I was growing up, you could literally go walk up and sit on a hill and watch a Rutgers football game. But I've always been a really big college sports fan. You know, that goes with the Northeast Territory. We usually care more about basketball than football. But I wanted to go to a big out-of-state sports school where no one from my graduating class was going. I loved all the people I went to school with, but we used to call Rutgers East Brunswick High School Phase 2. I already knew everybody. I wanted to make new connections. I love meeting new people. And so I wanted to just kind of branch out, do my own thing. And I still have all those connections, but now I have more because now I have the whole Gator Nation. I wanted to come here, and the dual degrees, you know, I didn't really know what I wanted to study when I got here, but I knew that I wanted to do a second degree in Spanish, which was kind of a weird thing because yes, I'm bilingual, but I started looking through all the catalogs, and back then it was a physical book that we had where you could flip through, and I kind of looked at marketing and business and public relations, and when I looked through the course load for public relations, it just stood out to me. And so I decided to enroll in the journalism school, and the rest is history.
Did you always want to have a career in the broadcast media field, or you kind of just saw the public relations in the catalog and that drew you in? Or
when I graduated, it was 2008, it was a recession, and by then, yeah, I wanted to go into something in either television, sports, or both. The ideal would have been sports television, but that was not really in the cards at that time. And when I graduated, I held office hours for myself that I would put a sign. I moved back home to New Jersey with my parents, were in the house I grew up in, and I put a sign on the door that said office hours in progress, and so people would know, don't come bother me right now. And I would just buckle down and look for a job. Yeah. That was it. It was so tough back then. And I almost took this other job at like an umbrella factory. And something just told me, hold off. I asked them, when do you need an answer by? And I waited until the last day. Mm-hmm. And literally the day before I had to give them a decision, I got a call from CBS Television Network Human Resources saying, hey, we want to bring you in for an interview for an assistant position in our affiliate relations department. I had no idea what that was, but I said, just tell me when to be there. I will be there. And so I called the umbrella people. I said, thank you so much for the offer, but at this time, I'm going to go in a different direction. The first day I went in for an interview, they had me meet with 7 people. And when I was meeting with the third one, who was my would-be supervisor, I knew I had the job. He has this whole wall of hats, and a lot of them were March Madness hats. And so I asked him if he watches the tournament. At that time, it was all on CBS. There was no deal with Turner back then. This was 2008. All the games were on CBS Television Network. And I asked him about it, and we just spent the rest of the interview talking about that year's tournament and how I told him that I knew Kansas was going to win because Memphis, coached by John Calipari, I said, John Calipari teams can't shoot free throws. I knew that would be a factor in that, and that's how I knew I was going to get that job, because I said, if this is who I'm going to be reporting to, and he enjoys talking with me, and they offered me the job.
Nice. So you kind of got your foot in the door in, some personal interests and working with.
Yeah, I had no connection to CBS. I just applied. They happened to call me. A lot of people do ask, who did you know to get in there? Yeah. No one. I honestly just got lucky.
Right. What exactly is affiliate relations? Kind of walk us through the different roles you held working your way to being senior manager in the division.
I work as a liaison between the CBS television network and local television affiliate stations that are affiliated with CBS throughout the country. And what do I do with them? Well, that could be anything. So it could be news, sports, research, entertainment, marketing, legal, you name it. Anything they need. So if I have a station that calls me and they just want to do an amendment to their contract, they want to change where they air a network, a CBS network television program, they go through me and I will work out, well, okay, is this an upgrade for us? Is there something that we can get out of it that'll make this, a better situation for us, especially if it's, a move to a less favorable time period. This week, a big thing is people reaching out, oh my God, our clients in Indianapolis really want to go see the tournament games in Indianapolis for the Sweet 16 and Elite 8. So I'll set them up with tickets for those games. It could be anything. One of the examples I like to give, particularly to Gator Nation, is one of the things I do with sports has to do with NFL game assignments. So let's go all the way back to when Tebow was in the NFL, because everybody knows Tebow. So obviously that was a big deal, just nationwide, obviously, because he's Tebow. But especially in the state of Florida, there's so much local interest. But he was playing for the Broncos. So the moment that they announced Tebow was going to be starting his first game, the first phone call I got was from our CBS station in Miami. And they said, you have to switch us to the Broncos game. We need the Broncos game, because there were no local Florida teams, believe it or not, playing on CBS that week. We didn't have a Jaguars game, a Bucs game, or a Dolphins game in that window on CBS that day. So it kind of was just a perfect storm of that. And so I'd say about 5 minutes, maybe less, after I got off the phone with someone in Miami, I had a phone call from the director of CBS Sports Programming. And she called me intentionally for the reason of, I understand Gator Nation, I understand the importance of Tim Tebow. And she said, do you think we should switch the entire state of Florida to the Broncos game this weekend? And I said, considering I already heard from Miami, the Florida station the furthest away, yes. And she said, done deal. So, the whole state of Florida, you can thank me that you guys got to see that game on CBS that day. But if there's a local player in a market and there's, no local team playing, another example I always give is our two little stations in Wyoming. If the Broncos are not playing, they always get Bills games. Why? Because Josh Allen went to college in Wyoming, so they all freak out if they don't get to see their hometown hero, Josh Allen. We'd be planning, we used to have a big affiliates lunch the week when we used to do a big CBS upfront in New York, and we used to have this big presentation at Carnegie Hall, and it was a fun time, but it was chaotic. And I used to explain it to people, because I'd be working the whole weekend, and they'd say, what are you doing? And my mom would call me, why are you missing Mother's Day? Well, I have to work this weekend because we're doing this event. And she'd say, what is this event? And I'd say, the best way to explain it is, I'm planning a wedding for 300 people I don't know. There's no bride or groom, but I need to get all the seating right because I don't want any fights breaking out, right? Because if there's somebody here who's having a dispute with it, you don't want them sitting next to each other. Right. But you also have to be strategic, right? So if we know we have something coming up, say the Masters, right? I might say, oh, well, the general manager of our station in Augusta is going to be there. Maybe I should sit them with people from sports that are going to come to this lunch. So things like that. And then, we'd have talent come to the lunch and, so-and-so's a big golfer. So-and-so went to this university and so did this person. And just you don't know these people personally, but we'd have physical cards that we'd print out. We'd have notes about every single person, and they'd always come up to us later and say, wow, like that was such an interesting thing. Did you know that so-and-so, also went to Princeton? And I'd say, yes, that's why I sat them next to you.
It sounds like you're a diplomat, and like from entertainment to legal jargon and everything in between.
Yes.
So how many affiliates do you work with?
So we actually have affiliates, or we have, I should say, CBS television stations in 209 of the 210 Nielsen designated market areas. 14 of those are CBS owned and operated stations, which means we, Paramount, owns those stations. So they're a little bit different than a traditional affiliate. But then we also have affiliates in Guam, Bermuda, American Samoa, the U.S. Virgin Islands, and Puerto Rico. And I actually personally do manage those offshores, so it can be a little chaotic at times. I do work across 9 time zones, so that's why when I'm on vacation, I have to turn off my phone.
Yeah, totally, just madness all the time, a little bit. Yeah,
madness is year-round for me, not just March Madness.
Yeah.
I had an opportunity to work overtime for CBS Sports, and I told you I love sports. I said, okay, this is a fantastic opportunity. So I had a few different roles there, working, nights or weekends. I think my first introduction was during my first March Madness, actually, at CBS, which would have been March of 2009. I was working in, I guess you'd call it fan relations. You think about football, right? If I'm in New York, I'm probably watching the Jets. If you're in Gainesville, you're probably watching the Jaguars if they're playing at the same time, right? So we call that regionalization. Mm-hmm. So regionally, you're getting a different game assignment. We used to have that for March Madness. Every game used to be on CBS. So fan relations was more important because we would have phones ringing off the hook of, the drunk Kansas fan that lives in Lexington, Kentucky and wants to throw a fit because Kansas and Kentucky are playing at the same time. And I'd have to say to them, well, sir, you live in Lexington. We are contractually obligated to show Kentucky through its conclusion in your market. If you want to watch the Kansas game, go back to Kansas. I don't know what to tell you. One time, actually, the Gators were in a national window, and I happened to be the one to pick up a phone from an angry Kentucky fan who complained about the Gators, and this was actually in 2014, and he was yelling that he wanted to watch, quote, the best team in the SEC. And I said, sir, you're watching the best team in the SEC. Yes. He said, I want to watch my Wildcats. I said, sir, your Wildcats don't play till later in the day. Mm-hmm. I don't even think they were on CBS that day. I think they were on TBS or TNT. Mm-hmm. And he said, oh no, the Kentucky Wildcats are better. I said, actually, the Kentucky Wildcats lost 3 times to the Gators this year. They lost in Gainesville, in Lexington, and in the SEC tournament, but I'm happy to discuss this further if you want to hear about it. And everyone else in the room was cracking up, and they're like, wow, of all the people to answer that phone call. Mm-hmm. Eventually, that turned into them just automating a message of, you can find this game at this time. And so that sort of disappeared. But because we saw it was headed that way, I actually did take on a different role with sports additionally, where I did work in the room with the directors, which was kind of cool to be, behind the scenes in the control room and see everything. But that was, more of an administrative kind of role, which, they all were. They were, meant for overtime purposes, just little things people needed on the weekends. But I loved it because I got to be right there in the thick of it. And so I did work that, kind of transferring phone calls, from this person in research to this producer. So, that was okay. But then someone else asked if I wanted to work with the writers in the writer's room on scripts. And I'm like, yeah, so what am I doing there? And so I wasn't writing the scripts, but I was definitely there to help with them and, just help with how they were organized, how they were distributed, how they were marked up for different people, whether it was for the director, for the talent, for the research, and making sure those got to the right people at the right time. But because of my vast sports knowledge, they did always take advantage of that. They would love that. They'd just turn around. Liz, who won this game this week? What was the score? What are they ranked now? Okay. And then they say, well, we trust you. We're putting that in the script. The man who worked the teleprompter was a Gator. And he was, I think, class of, 1983 or something. He was much older than I am. And the first day that I walked in, I had this Gator bag. He looks at me. Why do you have that? He's skeptical. He thought somebody's messing with him.
Yeah.
Why do you have that bag? Did somebody tell you to bring that? I said, no, this is just my bag. I went there. And that actually was when he took his hat out of his bag and put it on. He goes, well, I went there. And he always wore that hat. And he's like, this is good.
Yeah.
This is really good. And so then we had a TV in the lower left corner of all the, wall of TVs. I loved it. That was always designated for Gator sports.
Oh, okay.
Always. I do miss that this time of year because I think March Madness was probably the most fun time to be on set. I would be there with like Clark Kellogg and Kenny Smith and Charles Barkley and, just get to joke around with those guys, and they were a lot of fun. And they would always have such great stuff for us because we'd be working crazy hours because we'd have to stay until the last game was over. And a lot of times that's 1 o'clock in the morning, and they'd always try to keep us going. And they would just have, a frozen yogurt machine in the hallway, and there's a chicken and waffle bar down the hall. They're doing a sushi station. They're doing, there's a freezer full of ice cream. They would just bring in random stuff. That was a lot of fun. Unfortunately, they did shut that all down during COVID. So after I became ineligible for overtime, I actually still stayed on, and they just gave me an hourly rate. And I said, I want to keep doing this just because it's fun. Yeah. It wasn't about, this is a great way to make, time and a half anymore. It was, this is just fun. I enjoy being around it. So I actually did that part-time for 11 years during my career. But yeah, I never worked full-time in sports.
So what are your biggest challenges in your current role as senior manager?
One that no one would think of that really only impacts me at work is Bermuda. Believe it or not, they go by different laws. They're our only international affiliate. So I always say I'm the head of international affiliate relations because I am. That's my market. I handle them. They have a lot of piracy. The government there has been cleaning it up a bit over the years. Whenever they call me up, hey, this channel is pirating this NFL game from Canada and they're sandwiching it. So if, we're on channel 9, like they're putting it on 8 and 10 and they're pirating it. So we're not getting this. And, and it was a big problem. So I jokingly refer to it as the Pirates of the Caribbean. There's a lot of piracy there. It is getting better for sure. But that over the years has definitely been a big challenge for me because I sit there and, then I go talk to a lawyer and he's like, well, ordinarily, I would do this. And he's like, I'll send a cease and desist and I'll do this and I'll do that. And then he's like, well, in the US, we would, talk about this law and talk about that. And he's like, but they don't have that there. And I'm like, and I always joke, I say, guys, if you want to send me to Bermuda for a few years to get my law degree there, I'm willing to take one for the team. Yeah. But they have not taken me up on that yet. So
I heard that you're able to eat 35 blueberry pancakes in under 10 minutes. So if that's true, what's the story behind that?
Do you have 35 pancakes in 10 minutes to spare?
We don't, but we have 10 minutes. I don't know.
Well, then we'll never know. So the story behind that, I love pancakes. Growing up, I used to always watch the Nathan's hot dog eating contest with my dad. And it was just kind of this thing, and we've been to it before, and I don't know, I heard they were doing a blueberry pancake eating contest on the Upper West Side years ago, and I said, all right, free breakfast. And so I went, but I was actually featured, believe it or not, on the local NBC, which I did clear with my boss at the time. I was kind of sized up. They put me next to the biggest man there and kind of had us back to back. And I was talking all kinds of trash about how I was going to eat all these pancakes just because I thought it was funny. And, I ate 35 pancakes in 10 minutes. I did not win, but
that's wow.
I walked away with free breakfast. So
yeah.
It was a fun day. I was interviewed briefly for that. Mm-hmm. We talked a bit about how I work with all these different stations and put together presentations and things. I think probably my favorite interview was when I went to Bowling Green, Kentucky on a station visit, and they put me on the air because that's, market 180 or so. I don't know what they are this year, don't kill me. But I guess it was a big story for them that I was in town visiting. And so they actually interviewed me on their local news. And shout out to me, because their general manager is a University of Tennessee graduate. I love her to death, but I had to let her know,
Gator.
what's up, right? So if you watch this interview, I'm in all orange and blue, and I just shout out the Gators because that's who I am, what I do. I said, if you're making me get up at 4:30 in the morning to be on your local news, you're gonna hear about Gator Nation in Tennessee. I don't care. Or Tennessee and Kentucky. It's kind of a straddle market. It's closer to Nashville. So I said, yeah, you're gonna hear about it. And she said, okay. But yeah, I go on this. Sometimes these station visits can be fun. Unfortunately, in the era of Zoom, we don't get to visit as much as we used to, but I'll share one of my other favorite moments was going on a helicopter tour of Salisbury, Maryland.
Interesting.
And I did ask them, they took me out for a nice steak dinner. I still don't know the answer. I asked, if you eat a steak in Salisbury, is it a Salisbury steak?
You'll never know.
Unknown.
Yeah. Can you explain the digital fact books that you've created for onboarding new station personnel, and what key elements did you prioritize in this project, and how that affects CBS affiliates?
Sure. So part of that is really just me trying to bring CBS into this century. CBS is a fantastic company. It's a fantastic brand, right? But internally, or I'd say even in the industry, I think we're known sometimes for being a little late to adopt new technology. And so when I came in, we had a physical fact book. And if you can imagine a binder this thick, a literal binder. And the first, when you start a new job, they tell you to do something, you do it, you're learning. And so every time there'd be, a new group owner or a new station. So when I did start, we did not have stations in all 209 of the 210 markets like we do now. So we would have some new stations in some smaller markets joining on, or maybe a new ownership group just took over a market, somebody was sold. And they would physically have me make a binder with all this information, about sports schedules and primetime programming and different things. So, I probably made 2 or 3 of them. And then I went into my supervisor's office one day and I just said, this is so antiquated. I said, can I just do this in a PDF? And he's like, well, is that a thing we can? I said, why not?
Yeah.
The last one I did was for the Virgin Islands. I said, I now have to go deal with mailing this to the Virgin Islands. And I'm like, it's expensive and it's heavy. And I had to go find a box I created like a mock-up of what it would look like. And I sent it to him and he's like, no one ever mentioned that before. So I said, yeah. I said, not only that, now I can just keep it updated year round and share a link and just email it.
Yeah.
We'd have these dividers and we'd have these little tabs that have to print these labels and put them on a tab, and you'd have to, oh, here's sports, here's marketing. Now it was just click. Okay, I want to know what news programs they have. What are the feeds that are in there? What are the standard operating procedures? And it's just all there. So once I sent it to him, he said, well, this is much easier.
So as you know, UF is the AI university. So how do you see artificial intelligence transforming your work and potentially the broader media landscape?
It's fantastic when it works, and there's so much potential there. And I mentioned I'm trying to get my department on board with a lot of things. I'm trying to get my department to be one of, if not the first department at Paramount to have an AI agent that can help. Partially because, selfishly, I want to get some things off my plate because I get a lot of questions that have already been answered, and I'd love it if they could direct those questions to an agent that just responds with, hey, on this date, you got an email that said this in the 3rd paragraph, and, does that answer your question? Yes, it does. And then, I can sleep and I don't have to answer, a question at 1 o'clock in the morning where people are asking me, hey, real example, 1 o'clock in the morning, I got an email from Idaho a few months ago, just, does CBS have the Final Four and championship this year, or is it on Turner? I mean, you could Google that.
Yeah.
But the problem is I'm so accessible to these stations and so responsive and have been for so long. So, it'll be faster to ask Liz. So I think that's going to be a really big part of the future.
Yeah, I agree. So what emerging trends in broadcast media do you believe will have the biggest impact in the coming years?
The trends of streaming are going to continue to impact broadcast. That's, widely known. But I think a big one right now is trends in sports rights. That one's definitely been a thorn in my side lately. So all these regional sports networks that have been folding, a lot of those rights are going back to broadcast television. And that's been really interesting because you'll have these independent groups that now buy up rights to major sports and then they want to air them, but they might not have the availability, depending on their contract, to air that. So they have to come to me and say, hey, we picked up a package for, the Kansas City Royals, and here's how many games we're airing. And then I say, well, that's a great plan in theory, but if you do that, you're going to owe us X amount of dollars because this is this. And if you do this many games, it might be a breach of contract, or, and I think that's going to be a really interesting one to see. And, obviously the sports rights are changing across different networks. I was, of course, so sad to see SEC on CBS leave CBS after all those years and go over to Disney. But, we have Big Ten, and that's been, an adjustment for me as, obviously a huge fan of SEC sports. But it's that I think that would be a big trend that I'm interested to see where it goes.
What advice would you give to those aspiring to build a career in broadcast media?
I think the best advice right now is to be flexible and open-minded. I will tell you that some of the things I do at work didn't exist when I was in college. So don't be too hyper-focused on this is what I need to do. This is, be open-minded. Your first job does not have to be your dream job. Every job, every opportunity is a learning experience. And there are jobs that you'll have in your lifetime that don't exist right now as jobs. And that's just the way it is, especially we talked about the new technology and AI and the way things are changing. It's all going to change a lot. So, just be open-minded, be flexible, and never stop learning.
Thank you so much for your insight, Liz. I had a wonderful time talking to you. So thank you to our viewers for joining us. Until next time, good night.